All right, Drew Hartman, welcome to the show. Today is the first of what I hope is going to be a series of deep dives into specific aspects of bike fit and geometry. You are our fit expert. Can you give me and everybody who hopefully watches this a little background in how long you've been fitting and your history in the bicycle industry?
Thanks. Thanks for having me. I've been selling custom bikes since the early 2000s. Went to bike fitting school in Boulder, Colorado with Chris Jacobson, who's now with bikefitting.com, who's Shimano. And he was my teacher with the Serrata course. Full disclosure, Serrata was it's a good building block, but now modern bike fitting has changed tremendously. A lot of endless education, reading books, watching videos, talking to mentors. That's kind of where things start to come from. I'm a co-owner of On Your Left Cycles along with Derek Fetco, and also an Abbey Bike Tools ambassador for Jason Quaid out in Bend, Oregon.
So, and real quick, for those of you in or near Louisville who are looking for a bike fit, On Your Left is on Bardstown Road or Baxter?
625 Baxter Avenue, right across from Spinelli's Pizza.
Where is Serrata now? Are they in business, out of business? What's
Ben, I think, is doing a brand called Moto Mio, and I
okay?
forget what that means, but no, Serrata is defunct. Yeah.
It's a great brand, and I remember they're fitting, but I feel like too that was a period where the whole of the bike industry was looking for a way to monetize bike fit, and so everybody was branding, and there was some good stuff that came out of it, but it looks like we've changed a lot. It's going to evolve as is any individual's bike fit. So
For sure. Yeah.
and that's so that brings us into the show, and what we're going to do for the people out there is, when I see a bike geometry chart, I'm pretty used to it and I can scan it and get an idea of what type of bike that is and, what the fit range is going to be. But when I think about the average customer, a lot of them either don't really know what any of these numbers mean or they're hyper focused on one number, like or two these days. Reach and stack, which I remember Leonard Zinn didn't introduce it, but he wrote an article about reach and stack in like 2009. He's like, yes, this is the way to go because we've been focused on effective top tube. And somebody wrote in and said, hey man, what about head and seat tube angles? And how does that change? And, that's one of those things that does make a difference. You can correct me if I'm wrong in the way I think the bike's going to fit, but definitely the way it's going to feel and perform. So
100%.
so today's first episode is something that I've just been intrigued by because of a few bikes that got introduced in the peloton, and I think it's a little bit more topical, and that's seat tube angle. Before we get into it, I'll let you tell us about seat tube angle and sort of, I guess, if you can give us an idea why it's historically been about 72, 73 for not all bikes, but a lot of bikes, and what, how this is going to impact the fit and feel for your average rider.
Okay, yeah. So, I mean, seat tube angle was a roughly approximation. It was getting the seat post in an angle to where when you move the saddle on the rails, you can effectively get the rider in the fit window for knee over pedal spindle. And now with modern bike fitting and modern frame geo, we're seeing pro tour athletes go further forward. And so that's where we're seeing the steepening of the head tube angle, because even if you look at, for a good example, of somebody like Remco on his tarmac, he's got his saddle slammed forward on his SL8, which is, and the thing is like, yeah, it's a carbon railed saddle, and Remco has probably as many saddles as he needs. So if one starts to bend or pack out or whatever, the team mechanic puts another one on. For the layperson, that doesn't work. So the modern bikes are starting to move people forward, and triathletes are like, duh, we've been doing that for a long time. Now, I would say, just a quick caveat, we also have seen some pretty crazy crashes by some of the world's best bike handlers. And so the long and short is that when you put the center of mass further forward, right? So like knee over pedal spindle's idea in bike fitting, and we still do it under direct observation, is that we use the rider for setback to balance that rider on the bicycle. The further you get towards the rear axle path, rather, the bike's going to feel more stable. So if you have a larger rider or you have a taller rider, moving them back is going to stabilize that pelvis and really help. Hopefully that kind of
Yeah.
helps.
I've noticed, and this is more of just, looking at the evidence and pictures, that if we look at the early 2000s pros, Lance and all those guys, versus today. In the early 2000s, they were like spread over the top of the bike. It was a very long fit. Their back was almost flat just on the hoods. And now if you look at like Tade, he's more like an upside down V. Like that's not the
Yeah.
cockpit, but like the bar to stem is pretty tight. And I think that aids in, I guess, power output and aerodynamics for what we're going for.
Yeah, and I think that one thing that needs to be mentioned is so like when we talk about these 0.5% of a 1%, somebody like Tade and Remco and those guys and Matthew even, although Matthew's kind of an outlier because he uses slightly more of a traditional fit, like you just mentioned. The Tades and the Remcos, let's just use them because they're easy for us to kind of find photos of and video of. Those guys, one thing to keep in mind, those guys put out such an enormous amount of power. They're de-weighting their pelvis. So where they're sitting on the bike, it's the saddle pressure that they experience. I'm really curious because we have saddle pressure mapping here from GBMIs. And what I'm really curious is to see what their saddle pressure mapping looks like under their power. Because I mean, if you're putting out 350 watts and you weigh 150 pounds or 140 pounds, the amount of pressure going through that saddle is not as great. But then you take somebody like me, 235, right? And you have me and we move the saddle back and the setback, the pressures are just going to be higher. I'm a bigger athlete. I'm assuming you're probably 170, 180, somewhere in that range.
Thank you. I'm like 190, 195. So used to be 170. That's the goal. But yeah,
Okay, yeah.
but yeah, it's in, but obviously, like where the pros go is where we go. So not where we go, but certainly customers. So they're all focusing on, hey, Toddy and Remco and Jonas are doing this, and that's the way I want to go. I mean, we have guys like us who are riding S5s and SL8s, and now the bikes we'll talk about, the Factor One and the Ridley Noah Fast. Which so as we get into it, I think sort of traditionally road bikes were about 72 and a half, 73 and a half seat angle. Just general housekeeping, I'm almost always going to refer to medium-ish size frames because that's what I ride and they're more common. Obviously, those angles go change in smaller bikes, but on the Ridley and the Factor, they've done two things. The main thing is the seat tube angle is about 75 to 76, so it's moving more towards time trial. Like generally, time trial bikes, they're what would you say, like 78 to 80 degrees?
I'm not gonna tell a fib. I don't do a lot in that field. The bulk of my bike fitting is gonna be road.
Road,
So
yeah.
I mean that does sound right. Yes, because you're moving the athlete more into a forward position. And like also let's the why. When people come into me, they're like, "Hey, I want to do Ironman. I want to buy a time trial bike." And then you discuss the options, and they're like, "Well, I was thinking, right around 2 grand." And it's like, sure, you can go buy a used time trial bike where every bolt and everything's rusted on it and it doesn't want to move. And then somebody's cut stuff and all that stuff. And the long and short of it is it doesn't work. But to get back to the point is that a time trial bike is designed to keep you in a position to where you're freshest for a run, right? And that's why a time trial position is what they is why that people use that, if that makes sense.
And that's also also on the time trial position that, if you want to be in the skis,
Sure.
you need that more forward position. Whereas on these road bikes, they are extending the reach by about 2 centimeters. And I guess this would be a good thing to re-reference Remco's angles are pretty traditional, but he is slammed way forward. I don't know how long his stem is, but he's going to be way more out in front of or on top of that front wheel. Whereas on the new designs, the idea is that extended reach is going to help, keep you a little bit more centered, even though you're over the bottom bracket instead of the rear wheel. I don't know how much that is going to help make this ride more. I think Factor talks about it being a safety issue, that because of that extended reach, they don't have to rely on mill stems.
I mean, you've been around the bike business a long time, and I have been too. I mean, I think that I think this is a step in the wrong direction. It needs to have a disclaimer. These are essentially weapons, right? And in order to ride said bicycle, you need to have a certain level of fitness and mobility. I mean, the thing is like you can't, you can't go buy an Armani suit and look like a male model just by buying that Armani suit, and you can't go buy a Factor. And full disclosure, I'm a Factor dealer. I can sell one. The thing is I think this is a little bit of a disservice in the bike business because if somebody buys that bike based on, this is a safer bike. And the reality of it is the position that we're putting the athlete in is not, I mean, people don't need tarmacs, if let's just pick on Specialized for a minute. It's fascinating to me because, over the years, one of the things that's challenging in this business, and Tom, you're in bike, you've been around bikes and you're a real estate agent. Ultimately, at the end of the day, you're in customer service. And it's about reading the room and it's about understanding your customer, whether they're buying their first home or 10th home or first bike or their dream bike. For people, they don't want to hear, oh, well, they've been dreaming about the SL8. They've watched Remco ride that gold bike with the gold shoes. I mean, I'm not a specialized dealer and that has me hooked. I'm like, what a
Yeah.
compelling story, right?
Yeah.
But the reality of it is, at the end of the day, people buy that SL8 regardless of whether I tell them it's a good idea, and they're like, "No, I'm going to ride that." And it's like, but why? Why, if you love the Specialized brand, why wouldn't you go buy a Roubaix? And shout out to Jimmy Flaherty at Parkside Bikes. Always been a friend of ours.
Yep.
Happy belated birthday, right? Yesterday was his birthday. But at any rate, like, a Roubaix is a perfect bike for the consumer. And that's where these Ridley Noah Fast and the Factor One, it's hard for me to wrap my head around how many people in this town could ride one and ride one safely and effectively. And also, too, one thing that's fascinating is I've had the privilege of working with some really, really fast guys. And man, some of these guys are suffering in silence big
Yeah.
time. And I'm like, why are you suffering? Like, you think that the 140 stem and the slam stem and the saddle push forward, and you have pelvic instability, and you tell me that you have all kinds of different chamois creams and all this stuff. And it's like, there's plenty of great videos on the internet, to reference this style of stuff. I mean, I would say, you're talking about Leonard Zinn and stuff like that. And Leonard Zinn certainly is a great resource. He's a tremendous resource for really tall athletes, I'll say.
Absolutely.
One of one, and he's a proponent of longer cranks for taller athletes, which is really cool.
Yeah.
But the thing is like, I hung out with Bike Fit James in January of 24 when he was in the States, and we talked bike fitting for hours. And one of the things that a lot of what he said to me, and always try to glean knowledge for somebody that's really great at their craft. And I also talk to Craig Watson, who is a fitter out of Madison, Wisconsin. He does fitting for Wheel and Sprocket up there, and
Okay.
a couple other people. But Craig's probably the nicest guy in the bike business. He's definitely the nicest bike fitter I've ever met. But we discussed this stuff at length. And the thing that's fascinating to me is that the bicycle business, it does no service to the athlete if they can't ride it, right? It's just like selling somebody an Armani suit that they're not a 40 regular,
Yeah.
they're a 44 short or whatever, right? So, and that's where it's hard for me to get excited for a customer, because I'm kind of like, man, I understand you want that aesthetic. One of the things that I do with bike fitting is, it's like, okay, let me put you in a position. Let's do proof of concept, right? If you're going to get a custom house done, more than likely a lot of architects will make you a model, right? So you can look at that and see inside of it and move it around, right? So you can have some level of scale. Well, my thing is with everything, like your beautiful bike behind you that has everything integrated into it, right?
Yeah.
Well, where do we go? Like, where do I go as a bike professional? You're a bike professional. You remember, well, man, I could swap out from 110 to a 90 and get that person's hands from going numb, and they love the bike. Well, now we got everything ran through the bar, right?
The
And
pain. Yeah.
again, and again, I talked to Matt Shanley. He's a general manager of Scott USA. And I'd sold a Scott foil $10,000 bike, one piece bar stem combo. Didn't fit the customer remotely. So then I take off a bar stem combo that doesn't fit the athlete, and we chuck it. And then I have to buy another one. Then I have to cut lines, got to rebleed brakes, retape bars. It's a couple hour process at a minimum, right? And that's for somebody that knows what they're doing.
Yeah.
And so I guess, well, I'm off tangent, but I guess the point is like, yes, when you're talking about C-tube angle, to kind of go back to where you want to go, the C-tube angle is, generally speaking, the reason why the Noah Fast and the Factor One have moved the seat angle more forward, is so the saddle can be central on the rails, right? So you don't have a diving board effect where the saddle's springing forward. Because if you look at all these athletes, even under extreme power, even somebody like Remco, whose pelvic stability is phenomenal, they gravitate forward. And so does even Matthew Vanderpool,
Yeah.
so.
Well, regardless of the angle, I think when you're doing that max power output for a long time, you're going to ride the rivet. That's
Mhm.
just used to that from years of riding. If I'm riding hard doing like a 5-minute interval, I know that I'm going to be on the tip of that saddle regardless of where it is in terms of angle. And so I guess this is trying to complement that style of long solo breakaway for everybody. But then you're right, when we get back to the lay person who just sees a cool bike under their favorite pro, our job is to kind of steer them away. Now, have you had anybody request the Factor One since you're a dealer? Anybody ask you about it?
No, I mean, people are like, "Oh, that's a neat looking bike," but I mean, it's a very expensive bike.
Yeah,
I mean, Louisville's. I mean, there's people that ride expensive bikes in Louisville, but I mean, there's just so much. There's so much stuff out there these days.
yeah, and I guess minimum on one of those, you're looking at about 9,000. That would be with like 105 Di2, I think. But
Yeah, probably in that range would be my
yeah,
guess for sure.
yeah.
Yeah,
I'd like to ride one to see, but I can't see myself committing to that geometry because it looks like the way it's designed, it looks like, okay, every day you're hammering. There's no relaxation in this frame. And honestly, in most road bikes, there's none. They're just aggressive. And that's why you're right. The Specialized Roubaix, which I had one that I got from Jimmy and I recently sold it because when they came out with a new Roubaix with the tire clearance, I was like, okay, this is my do all including gravel bike. It's definitely capable, but, and we'll get into this with head tube angle, the Roubaix does have traditional road geometry other than the stack and a slightly shorter reach. But when you have a 73.5-degree head angle, off road, a relaxed head tube angle is nice. It calms things down. I don't want laser like precision when I go through a mile of single track in Brown County. I'd
for
really like,
sure.
and I think that's one of those things that, well, just like I sent you the guy's chart from Reddit, I'll pop it up online. He said, "Hey, are these two bikes going to fit the same? Reach and stack are close enough, but his head angle is 2.5 degrees slacker and his seat angle is a degree steeper. So you're effectively going, kind of in like this. It changes all those numbers, and it all
Yes,
becomes a different bike. So, that's why like the Roubaix as a comfort road is amazing. I think it makes sense for so many people, but I see more and more people like, "Hey, I want to do gravel." It's like, well, if you're going to do a lot of gravel, you might want a hardtail, honestly, because yeah, it depends on how chunky it gets. But
sure.
yeah,
Well, and, it's like, and also I should mention that we're a Scott dealer and we have the new Scott Addict, and the Addict is a little shorter top tube, a little bit taller reach, small numbers like 3 and 4 millimeters, which kind of you mentioned. You're like, well, somebody was asking about these millimeters, but the thing is when you're talking about a head tube angle of like 7, that it's continues up on that path, so it's actually more than the numbers suggest.
yeah,
And, honestly, this is, something that I've thought about it in a large kind of like thinking about it. It's challenging to think about because the reality of it is you almost need a bike CAD system to
yeah,
kind of mock up a position. Um, to see where you're at. 99 spokes and websites like that are tremendous where they overlay bikes because that really does help kind of impose things to be like, oh wow, that is, and I've used that as a tool. The thing is like saddle pressure mapping, saddles, the amount of time that I've spent talking about saddles in my life and the amount of time that you've talking about saddles is tremendous, right? You hear it all the time. But the reality of it is people ask what's the best saddle. And the thing is like there's a lot of great saddles, there's just a lot of crummy positions. And what I mean by that is it's stack and reach. That's the
yeah, yeah,
elephant in the room. Like, here's the thing. If you can't bend over and touch your toes easily, running like the bike you have in the background, you're running what, 7 to 8 centimeters of saddle to bar drop?
eight.
Okay. Not everybody can do that.
No,
Not everybody can do that. But
some
I
days
will
I can't
say,
do that.
what's that?
Some days I can't do that.
Yeah, yeah. Well, but the thing about it is how that bike feels with that much weight on the front wheel is tremendous, And something I wanted to say, but I didn't want to interrupt. And one of the reasons why the Roubaix doesn't work off road is the wheelbase is too short.
Yeah,
So your
that too.
gravel bike wheelbases are too short, are longer. But the challenge with gravel bikes is the top tubes get really long
Yeah,
and the reaches and the stacks because we're putting let's everybody, it's like the theory of underbiking is not even a thing anymore. It's like we need a 2.5 to fit into our gravel bike so we can go
yeah,
out and ride O'Bannon or something. It's
yeah,
like maybe go get a Norco Sight. That might be the bike for that job.
yeah,
But I get it. And the thing is like everybody wants that quiver killer, right? And that's where, you know, uh, I think when you're talking about geometry and stuff like that, I think it also kind of, in my mind, I just thought of this, is it kind of comes back to, do you like light beer or dark beer? Do you like white wine? Do you like red wine? And then, do you like American or do you like European, right? So I guess the point is that, with bikes, if you've ridden a bike long enough, a lot of people will have some opinion on how they like the bike to ride. But on the other end of the spectrum, I have asked people, where do you sit on the saddle? Do you feel two distinct points of pressure? The amount of looks that I get that I don't know what you're even talking about.
Yeah.
And there's zero judgment, right? There's zero judgment. Like, I've spent way too much time thinking about these things and researching these things where there's no judgment. It's just like, this is where bicycling is failing us, right? Because if the way I look at it is, if everybody bought the bike that actually fit their needs versus buying the visual aesthetic, cycling would go way up. And then, elephant in the room, look at Dutch bikes. The stack and reach to the moon,
Yeah.
right? Like, or reach is very short and the stack is very tall. They have a step through. They're not called ladies bikes. They're just called commuting bikes, right? And so the point is that people like that. And when the position of the handlebars is really high, you're sitting on your sit bones differently. You're like, I'm picking on your bike because it's in the background. But like, the reality of it is like, you have to rotate your pelvis forward. When you rotate your pelvis forward to sit on that bike, that's one position. But like, if you're sitting on a Dutch bike, that pelvis is more like this, where
Yeah.
your pelvis is more like this. You
Yeah.
know what I mean? And so I think that, yeah, I mean, C-tube angle, all those things. It's just one of those things.
And one thing I want to touch on before we get back to C-tube angle is the whole idea of stack, and something I see changing in biking in the industry, but will eventually come to the layperson. I remember in 2010 to 12, especially the younger guys, they were all about slam that stem. And there
Mhm.
are, for anybody looking at used bikes, one thing I would say is watch out for what's left in the stack. So many forks got cut too short. I've got one. A buddy of mine has one upstairs at the shop. He had this gorgeous Ridley Damocles, and he did that. And at one point, he was going to have me sell it to somebody else. And I looked at him like, I can't sell this to anybody else. You're like a half inch below the stem, and looks cool with the cap on, but the reality is there's a danger. And also, it doesn't do anything for the rider. And now what we're seeing, that I hope something like this will trickle out from the pro peloton, is that we're starting to see him move away from that low stack, because they're seeing that the arrow hood's position is more arrow because it closes this up.
Mhm.
Unless you're a yoga guru, if you want to close the wrist to chin area, the human windsock, you got to pull that stack up. Everybody's going for that look. Like, if I slammed this thing, there's like 40 mil underneath there. That would be like a 14 centimeter drop. And I see people doing that online. Like, leave yourself some room. You might have a sciatic issue. You always want to have some spacers just in case. But yeah, it's like they want to commit to that look and not think about anything that could change that. Fit is evolutionary. It's going to change year to year for sure. But more often than that, if I stop riding for 2 months, pack on 20 pounds and tweak my back, like, I'm not riding that. Like,
Yeah. Well,
but
full disclosure, 4 centimeters is traditionally the max stack height of allowed by all carbon manufacturers.
yeah, yeah, it is.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's as much as I could get on there. And it's like, and that's why I did that. I might play around, and if I do some yoga and feel good, I might drop a spacer and see what happens. But, and also, I got a lot of bikes. This is the bike that's like, go out and hammer it kind of thing.
That's your Corvette or your
Yeah.
911.
You're
Yeah.
not driving the kids to school in that. And so, but a lot of people need one bike to do it all. And going back to the triathlete, I've had so many customers who either they're going to do Ironman this year. That's the one thing, or they're going to do Todd Hetty's series of sprint tries. And when they're like, what should I buy? I say, get a road bike, get some aero bars, because it does what you need it to do, but the road bike is going to serve more purposes. Like,
Mhm.
riding with buddies. But seasoned triathletes have really fought me on that. They are convinced that a tri bike is so epically faster and there's no way to even get close with a road bike. And I'm like, when you get to that point of doing, 4 Ironmans a year, and this is sort of your part-time job, then yeah, I think you need that. But the average person is going to get 90% of what they need with aero bars and
I
practice.
mean, elephant in the room, fitness is everything.
Yeah.
I mean, fitness and mobility. I mean, one of the things that, I'm more convicted by at age 47 than ever before is your functionality of your being is worth more than that set of Envy Pro 4.5s that was running, right? Or the set of 6.7s that he run Strada Bianchi on, on 28 millimeter wide tires. I think that, yeah, I mean, it's such a challenge. And I think you're 100% right. I think the challenge that I run into with triathlete things is that triathletes are not cyclists. And I don't mean that in a bad way. I mean that as just, it's, they're doing three sports. And oftentimes they have been a fantastic runner or a fantastic swimmer in their life, right? And for whatever reason, they don't do those things anymore. Runners normally are all just broke down, but they don't want to give it up because they love the runner's high and they love the community, which I don't think a lot of them realize there's community in cycling too. It's just you have to go out and find it, right? But the amount of ex runners that I've sold bikes to is incredible, right? But at any rate, I think the challenge with TT bikes is they're just so expensive nowadays. I mean, you're talking 10K and you're not even talking anything really grand. And I think, the thing is like the Aero Advantage starts at 19 miles an hour. If you're averaging 19 miles an hour on your road bike, then you earn the TT bike is the kind of my thought process. But I mean, if you're out there riding in your drops comfortably and you can hammer out whatever mileage you need to, then go get the TT bike. But the thing that I see is people on TT bikes that look very sketchy. They don't look comfortable. They don't look balanced. And the reality of it is the bike business is always going to be run by people that sell. There's always going to be people that sell, 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 sell. Oh, you're doing a triathlon. You need a Cervelo. You need a Cervelo. You need a Cervelo. Great. But the thing is like, can the guy that's the CEO of the company buying that bike, does he have the time to ride that bike? Does he have the time to stay in that position? Right. And, positions are moving targets. Like you just said, you're like, hey, if I don't ride for 2 months, because we now have Alaska type winters here in Kentucky,
Yeah.
So you don't ride outside. And then when you go to ride outside, you're like, wow, those bars are in a different zip code.
Yep. Yeah. I've got a dedicated trainer bike just because it's, old Cannondale frame. I sweat all over, but it's got a more relaxed fit, and I find myself like, yeah, I need to move this to the road. I mean, it's not hybrid style, but it's definitely not as aggressive as what's behind me. You're going back to the C2 Bangle thing. Like, one of the things I wondered about when you see like the factor, just it's moving everything forward, but they also in their marketing, they talk about the long, monorail on that seat post. It's an aero seat post, so it's really deep, and you've got this long rail of adjustment. And within that, they say there is an effective 72 to 78-degree C2 angle. And this has happened with a lot of bikes. Cervelo used to do it with road bikes. The Soloist did it. The Fuji Aloha did it. It was the Aloha was also the SST for a period, and so it was like you could line it up on that saddle rail for people who want this fit. And has anybody asked you for this fit? Just come in and said, "Hey, let's slam it forward." If there is enough room on that monorail post to get them into an effective 75 or 76-degree angle. Is that the same as what Factor's doing with the whole bike? And can you work with that or?
I mean, you can work with that. And read the reality of 99.99% of the fits that I do is mitigating pain.
Yeah.
I have discomfort. What can I do to fix that? And through direct observation, we look at things of crunched shoulders that are all like this. And,
Yeah.
you see this Superman position, like you referenced Ghana with locked out arms.
Yeah.
Well, let's unpack that real quick. What does a locked out arm do? Well, that radiates up to your shoulders and radiates to your spine, and then it radiates down to your pelvis. Well, you need your SI joints to be functioning really well because that's how your hips and legs are moving. So the reality of it is you want to look fast. And, I knew Tade wasn't going to win Roubaix in the last 4 or 5K when he kept on standing up and pelvic thrusting into the front of his bike. Like maybe that Shimano neutral race support bike did a number on him, just putting him in a different position. I mean, he rode it for 7 minutes. I can't imagine, riding, he probably has ridden 20,000 miles on that Y1RS. So to jump on that bike, it had to be like a totally different thing. But I guess my point is that like, you've got to be comfortable in order to ride these positions. And yes, the Factor will effectively do that. The reality of it is that I haven't looked and did a deep dive, but do they do a bike CAD situation where it's like, okay, this is what bar stem combo you need? You know, I noticed Cervelo has a couple of spots on their S5s and stuff like that, which by the way, they're still too long and they're still too low. Like
Yeah.
hot
Yeah.
take,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
For average consumer.
Yeah. Well, and what factor I looked through a lot of it, they don't really have a hey, and I think at a bare minimum they should say, hey, if you're on an Ostro, whatever the normal bike is, this is the translation. They should have a tool online that says if you're looking at the one, give us, some side shots of you on the Ostro, and we're going to do that overlay and show you how it is and show you what stem and bar you need to get. They're not doing that. What they are doing is claiming that with a rider in a wind tunnel, it was something obscene like 18% faster than a tarmac, which is when I see numbers like that, obviously you cherry pick something to get there. And I hate when bike manufacturers find the one blip on a wind tunnel data set to say this bike is this much faster because it's got to be super specific. And talking about comfort, the one thing they can't do, and I think this will be a game changer in the industry, is we don't have a performance quantifier for comfort. And that's what we need. When you talked earlier about the guy who you were saying at mile 35, at mile 40, if your back is on fire, if your shoulders are killing you, it doesn't matter how fast that bike was the first 10 miles, you're losing so much right now. And how much did Tade lose in those when he's stretching the back out and his performance has diminished because of either he got beat to hell or maybe he rode the wrong bike. What's the performance impact? We can speculate, but we can't like put a number on it the way we can with Aero. And I think Aero and those numbers are BS. I mean, obviously they're all at like 40 to 48 kilometers an hour. For Americans, that's 25 to 30, which, sure, if on those downhills you got an Aero gain of 4 watts for 30 seconds, but it went away when you were dying at the end of the ride.
And
So
then that 19-year-old on the LA from 12 years ago just drops you like you're a bad habit. And then you're like, oh great. I've got my Aero socks on, I've got my Aero helmet.
all these individual watts. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, I love that. I mean, I love the idea of pushing the envelope, and I guess also too, it should be mentioned that the reason why these bikes exist is I believe the rules are if it's not available to you and I, the
Yeah.
riders can't ride it.
Yeah.
And just because you can doesn't mean you should. Would be, another thing that I kind of talk about. And also too, when I say comfort doesn't mean you can't be powerful,
Yeah.
right? You're going, like you said, the loudest thing in your body on a hard ride should be your like from breathing hard and your hamstrings and your glutes from working hard. It shouldn't be, I can't feel my hands, I can't feel downstairs, I can't feel my feet. Well,
Yeah.
those are all dead giveaways of foot instability. I mean, we could do a month-long podcast on shoes, but no one wants to talk about that. But that's the
I do want
thing
to
that
talk about shoes.
what's
Eventually.
that now?
I do want to talk about shoes eventually. I
Yeah.
think it's one a real quick anecdote. My favorite thing from early days on the bicycle, and this guy's asked me everything he needs to do and buy because he's getting into road riding. He's riding with our group. He wants to get faster. He says, "I guess I need the clip-in pedals." I said, "Yeah, and shoes." This was like 2009, and I said, "Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of choices out there." I wasn't carrying anything at the time. It was like, "You're going to the internet anyway." I said, "I wouldn't spend less than $100 on a set of road shoes." Without missing a beat, he immediately says, "Oh, I'm going to buy the cheapest shoes I can buy." And I'm just,
Sweet.
why would you, why would you do that? I mean, it's your feet. This is getting more stress than any other part of you. It's your primary power output device, and you're instantly going to like dumpster dive. Like, what is that? But it's interesting how we create I call it the white envelope fantasy, from the whatever the guy's name is with the white envelope money of like, I have $1,800 for a bike and it's got to be Ultegra Di2 hydraulic with fully internal cables and carbons. Like there's a pile of crap that will fill that imaginary box you just created somewhere. You're not going to like it, and trying to convince people to, buy within their budget, but also buy for what they're going to do has been one of the hardest things about selling bikes. Like just,
I mean, the aesthetic is everything for a lot of people, and I get it. I mean, vanity is a thing. I mean, why do we have cafes dedicated to all these aesthetic modifications for all the ladies and men out there in the world? I mean, it's just part of it. Yeah, no, And I think the one thing that, people need to recognize is the seat tube angle goes into the bottom bracket area, and bottom bracket drop, while it's not a end all be all measurement, a lower bottom bracket drop gets you lower to the ground. And for a newer cyclist, this is going to make them feel more planted. If you're pedaling through corners, fine, then let's run a higher bottom bracket. But I mean, I'm pretty sure you could coast through a corner with a lower bottom bracket and be just fine. Hot take, when you lower your bottom bracket, you also raised your bars,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, I was thinking
it's
about
one of
that
those things.
today, and it's one for the BB Drop episode. Do you think that because the bike industry they're very opportunistic. So I feel like the fits we're seeing on the Ridley and Factor are, yes, they're aiding the rider, but at the same time, Tade's not going to Colnago saying, "Hey, you got to give me a 76-degree C2 ankle." He's getting it done. So I don't know if this is going to take over the peloton or not, but it's definitely a selling point for brands to say, "Hey, we've built a bike that favors your KOM king." Since we're moving to shorter cranks and everybody's following Tade and Jonas at the same time, do you think the bike industry will start making lower bottom bracket racing bikes that are specific to crank length and selling that as like this major? I mean, it improves some other things. You lower the bottom bracket, you raise the stack, you improve that arrow hood, setup if people want that. The one thing is just pedal strike.
I mean, through talking through my bike fitting buddies, I mean, no,
Okay.
no, because they don't listen.
Yeah.
I mean, I talked to a major brand, and I talked to the rep, and I said, have the guys the product designers for road, have they ever talked to bike fitters about hood shape? And he's like, oh no, no, they design in a vacuum. They don't go
Yeah.
into bike shops.
Yeah.
And to me, if you want to build a superlative product, you need to find out who your end user is.
Yeah.
Right. And, while something can look good industrial design wise, if it's not what somebody needs, then in my opinion, like, what's the point? And that really blew my mind. And I would love to meet a product designer and say, hey, do you have 30 minutes? Might turn into 5 hours, but do you have 30 minutes? I'd love to like bend your ear about this because like, I think that Specialized has hinted at that with Retool and stuff like that. But the challenge with Retool is, as an athlete or as a fitter, developing an eye takes time. And, if you work around somebody that's been fitting for a long time, they just see things that you don't see in the same way that if you're around a bike mechanic who's worked on a lot of bikes and they're like, your headset's loose, and the customer's like, what do you mean my headset's loose? It's like, well, you don't hear that clang of the front of the bike when you dropped it down.
Right. Yeah.
And it's like, well, how do you know that? It's like, well,
Yeah.
repetition, right? And so I think, I wish the bike business was that adaptive, but I mean, I think that's looking at the bike business through rose colored glasses. I think a lot of them have a lot of money invested in molds. And so I don't think that they have the bandwidth to change something really quickly. Right. And also too, I think a lot of them probably aren't even aware that 165s are a thing. But the thing is like, there's a podcast out there with Chris Balzer out of Minneapolis, who's a very well-known bike fitter, and he's been selling cranks that length forever, right? So, and how he arrived there is through working with a lot of people. And I guess my point is, if you go see a very good bike fitter who's looked at thousands of people, they're going to have an idea. And that's where Serrata and those places come from is that, when people have problems, they need to go see somebody. And the reality of it is like, who has the money to buy a fancy race bike? Somebody in
Dennis.
not taking shots, but somebody in their late 40s or 50s, right? And so that's where we run into an issue is the people that want to ride that bike is not the college kid, because the college kid can't afford that bike traditionally. That doesn't mean there's I'm sure there's a sea of kids. Like one of our old customers works out at Specialized Austin, and like he was telling us about the Breakfast Club ride they have 1,200 riders. He said they have SAG support. They have a full police escort. They're sponsored by all the gel companies. And I
Yeah.
mean, I haven't seen it, but I mean, 1,200 athletes riding bikes. So, and of course it turns into a race.
Sure. Well, yeah.
We, we knew the cliff notes on that one, but
One of the guys I knew at Quality said he referred to the Tuesday lunch ride as the gun show because
yeah.
He said
Yeah.
people were coming out and just firing on all cylinders and, always doing that, "Yeah, I'm just gonna do a zone 2 today," but then you get out there and it's just launch after launch, so yeah, and that's I noticed when I kinda came back in, I had, like, a break from road riding for a while, and when I came back into it and started riding with groups, these guys are riding much more expensive stuff. Like, in 2010, I would, maybe you'd see some guys on, like, an Ultegra level Madone that was like a $3,000 bike, but guys are on S5s with SRAM Red and, like, reserve wheels, the whole 9. That's a $13,000 bike, and,
For sure.
yeah, and it's not comfy. I've ridden them and it's impressive how precise it feels, but I could feel now to be fair, I did a ride a couple years ago when I first got that Roubaix from Jimmy with a buddy of mine with an S5. And after the ride, I took his S5 for a quick spin. And that's a pretty jarring difference, like right away.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Especially I think I had 40 mils on and that's one of the things about comfort we'll talk about in another episode is that like tire pressure is doing so much for the modern rider and the people who are hesitant to max it out. I'm like, dude, just you're not going to miss it. Whatever that bike can handle, get the biggest tire on there, get something nice because does make a world of difference. Now it's not going to impact fit. And if you're riding that, 14 centimeter drop on a factor one, only it's a drop in the bucket, but we are
Yeah.
making some strides in more comfortable bikes in that sense, I guess.
Yeah, one thing I'll do is I'll reach out to Chad at Above Category. We're friendly and talk quite often, and I've been out there enough. And a good friend of mine was one of his mechanics for a long time, and I'm lucky enough to spend a lot of time in the shop visiting out there and talking shop. And Chad's been around every high end bike imaginable, and I'm going to ask him what his take on the factor is. But I will also ask him if he's okay with me talking about it. But
Yeah.
I mean, I know that his new mechanic out there is riding one. And he's a Cat 1 guy. So I'm curious. I mean, in the Bay Area, those descents aren't playing around, especially Conselman going down by the ocean with the wind coming off the Pacific into the headlands is mega. So, I mean, if the bike's not stable, but, if a guy's Cat 1, his core strength is probably insanity.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. It needs to be.
Oh, it has to be. Yeah. So,
When we do the next one on head tube angle, which the more I think about it is I'm amazed the bike industry doesn't talk about it more, and the effect it can have on bikes. Because I feel like Factor and Ridley have pushed this, hey, this is our change. This is what makes this bike different. But not many people are saying, hey, we relaxed the head tube angle for you. Like it's almost always that same. I feel like 72.5 to 73.5 has been locked in on bikes for so long. And you always read these reviews where people rave about laser-like precision, which is fine. I like that. But you know what? I kind of want to be able to like cruise on the tops and relax every now and then. And
uh,
if the bike is, always like on it, that makes it difficult. And one of the things we don't talk about is that that steep head tube angle doesn't necessarily bank the bike faster. It's not like we slow
no,
the bike down by relaxing that head angle, but we're so locked in tradition that like why doesn't the Specialized Roubaix have a relaxed head tube angle? That's one of the I
yeah.
want.
I mean, I think the reality of it is like the old, I mean, keep it simple, stupid.
Yeah,
And I think that if you start talking about details, you have people taking deep dives, and there's enough Reddit forums and bike forums that people discuss that kind of stuff. And that's where custom bikes, I mean, I was taught custom bike geometry by Matt Bracken, who's now the president of Pedro's, but he was the president of IF. And as a 23-year-old noob, he was beyond helpful at explaining a lot of that stuff. And he built multiple bikes that Bill Strickland said, who was the editor of Bicycling Magazine at the time. And he said, those are the best riding bikes I've ever ridden. And rewind probably 5, 6 years ago, I was at Handmade Bike Show in Sacramento, and I was working for Abby at the show. And I walked up, I said, Mr. Strickland, are you familiar with our tools? He's like, I'm not. So I brought him over and I was talking to him, and he's like, wow, these are cool. And, I just wanted a chance to talk to somebody. And I said, hey, I know you love Pegoretti's, which I'm a huge Pegoretti fan. The Geo's nails. He ran out a tall head tube way before it was cool.
yeah,
And he did all the different size increments. You could do 54, 55, 56,
yeah,
57, because he knew.
yeah,
Because, I mean, he built bikes. I mean, Tom Bonin rode one of his bikes. He built 27 bikes for Marco Pantani with different head tube angles
yeah,
for doing the climbs. Because Mark, if you're that good of an athlete, I'm sure Italians will do anything for the other Italian, right?
Right. Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, the bike geo thing, I think that it would be nice if people talked about it. I think really, as far as like bike fitting calculators and stuff like that, Envy's got it nailed where you can measure your bike behind you and pop it into their thing. And if you want the Melee or you want the Fray for road bikes, they'll tell you what you need.
Okay.
Which I think me as a salesperson and owner, that gives me less anxiety about maybe ordering the wrong thing.
Yeah.
So
Well, and so we'll have one last thing before we wrap up here, and then talking about ordering the wrong thing. If a customer comes in today, and let's say it's the customer we would expect, so he's late for he's finance guy, whatever, decent-ish shape, but he's no he's not clavicular or whatever that guy is. He's and he says, "I want a factor one." What are you as a bike fitter and salesman gonna say to this guy?
let's take a look at your fit and see where you are.
Yeah.
And then I've done this a number of times with customers. We had a doctor come in town. He really wanted an Ostro. And I said, let's see what you're riding with. And I explained to him, I'm like, look, here, you've studied for a long time. You're a very smart guy. You know what you want. I said, but what the heart wants and what the body needs can be two different things. And so what I said to him is like, let's put you in an Ostro position and you go ride that.
Yeah.
And he was like, well, I really just want to wear the bike. I said, I get that. I get that. I said, but I feel convicted by selling you a bike that doesn't fit you. And then it goes on eBay and then you sell it. And then you're just like, man, that was a terrible experience. And I guess sometimes I should just be a salesman and say,
Yeah.
sure, I'll order you a factor one. What color do you want? You want that Arctic camo color? Let's do it. You want the new red E1? Come on,
Yeah.
let's do it. You know what I mean? But
I feel like
it's not, there's ethics to this stuff.
yeah. I feel
And
like
it's like, cause you care.
you and I are probably at the same vein. Like we would have sold a lot more if we were just the hype guy. And I do see some people in shops who are like, oh yeah, let's put you on the tarmac. Can come on, like you're going to shed that weight and you'll be killing it in no time when it's like overweight, out of shape guy. But when you say put him on the Ostro fit, do you mean take his existing bike and then fit it like an Ostro? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then I do proof of concept and have him go ride,
Yeah.
and he's like, man, that's pretty aggressive. And I'm like, well, go see a good PT. I do have a fantastic PT that I recommend people to. Shout out to Chuck Clark at Results. He's phenomenal. He's a cyclist and he cares. He's going to make you more mobile. But and that's something that you have to work on,
Yeah.
you have to earn that position. You know
Yeah.
what I mean?
Yeah. Well, I think this is a great stopping point for C2 Bangle, and hopefully we can, add more to this as we do different aspects of bikes. Thank you so much for coming on the show. And
Thanks for having me. It's been great.
yeah, and if you're in Louisville and you need a fit, back is burning, and you want to ride the bike more, reach out to Druid on your left. I'll make sure and put contact info if you want on this when
Sure. Absolutely. Love to
hopefully,
work with you.
yeah, yeah, yeah.